My name is Patrick White. First off, I'll call it the important stuff. QR code to my LinkedIn. Have not been able to keep up with the chat today. I try to normally, but feel free to add me. That should take you right directly to my profile. As Ryan mentioned, what I want to focus on today is, really becoming a talent partner. More specifically, though, there's a lot of ways to do that, moving from that order taker to that talent partner. And so I'm going to talk specifically about how to use an applicant tracking system to get buy-in. So before I do that, though, I do want to start off and just kind of introduce myself. As I mentioned, my name is Patrick White. I have 8 years of talent acquisition experience, primarily, actually entirely in the SaaS/ technology space. The last 3 of those years have been kind of in a leadership management capacity, either leading small teams or functions. And so to start off, not going to talk about what an applicant tracking system is. I feel like most people on this call probably know that, but I do want to focus on a few things. And first off is, who really uses an applicant tracking system? So according to various Google searches and articles, over 97% of Fortune 500 companies use an applicant tracking system. And of that, or I'm sorry, 66% of large companies say that they do, while only 35% of small organizations do rely on them. Now, I've worked for what I would consider both larger and smaller organizations, and I've always used an applicant track system. But I do understand that a lot of this information changes depending on which ATS you might be using or if you're using one at all. Now, why someone would want to use an applicant tracking system? Firstly, 94% of recruiters agree that an ATS has a positive impact on hiring, and 62% of teams that use an ATS find higher quality candidates. But the thing that I think is interesting there is 94% of recruiters agree. I don't think the number is that high for hiring managers. And we'll get into that in a second. Because essentially, no, applicant tracking systems are not being utilized as much as they should or could be. Now, I want to start off, or I want to take a quote from the great Walter Payton in terms of becoming a strategic talent partner. And, it's when you're good at something, you'll tell everyone. When you're great at something, they'll tell you. And the question I want to kind of go off that is, when was the last time a hiring manager or a stakeholder at your organization told you the recruiting process was great? My guess is that unless you work for a fantastic company that gives great feedback a lot, you don't hear that very often. And one reason might be because people just don't think to give that feedback, but the other reason might be is because there's room for improvement in that process and in that partnership. Now, the difference between a talent order taker and a talent partner, there's a lot of them. Talent order takers, really trust their hiring manager and assume that they're correct around candidate profiles, processes, procedures. They might try to Hiring managers might try to change the process up or change up steps in the process that the TA team does not follow, right? And you would go along with that if you were the order taker. Additionally, hiring managers don't always know the best profile that they're looking for a specific role. They might think they do, right? But a lot of this is coming from past experiences as opposed to the data that us as TA partners have access to. And then in terms of talent partner, right, that role is, or that function is a little bit more consultative and strategic. You're able to challenge hiring managers' assumptions, right, around candidate profile, around procedures, processes. And, we heard earlier some great labor market statistics. Bringing that data when possible, especially for harder to find niche roles, I think is incredibly valuable. You can really start off the either relationship with the hiring manager or this new engagement with them on the right foot. If you have data around things like candidate profiles and what the labor market looks like, compensation expectations, right, can kind of help you hone in on what this profile might end up looking like at the end of the day when you found those candidates and gotten them through the process. And lastly, talent partners really use that business acumen and analytics to influence decisions, right? So they don't let the decisions get made for them. They use those tools they have and that data to make those decisions. Now, my own personal experience with applicant tracking systems. So as I mentioned, I have 8 years of talent acquisition experience. And everywhere I've worked, I've encountered hiring manager or hiring managers, oftentimes multiple, that refuse to use their applicant tracking system that their company has paid for. Um, Excuses range from I do not have time to fill out the ATS, I do not know how to use the ATS, and it's faster if I just Slack or GChat or email you my feedback. Obviously, there's many other excuses that hiring managers use, but those are three of my favorite. Real fast, I would say my answer to all those. The first one would be yes, you do. My second one would be I can train you how to use the ATS, and the third one would be it might be faster for you. It's not faster for me. Um, and so, you know, at a previous company, it became pretty apparent early on that the company was not using their ATS. They were paying for a tool that hiring managers just refused to use. Before I joined the company, I was brought in to lead their TA function, a very high growth software company. Before I got there, the person in charge of talent acquisition must have preferred Slack or GChat in terms of gathering feedback. And so nearly 0% of hiring managers were putting notes into candidate profiles in the ATS. As I mentioned, feedback was often slacked to recruiters. This hiring managers sometimes think is acceptable or appropriate. What they don't always realize, and this is where it just comes to telling them, is if you're a recruiter working on 10 to 15 different recs at any given time with, 5 to 10 candidates, I'm doing easy math for my own sake, you're dealing with feedback on 50 to 150 candidates at any given time. Obviously, Slack is not the appropriate tool for that. Anyways, at this company, the average time to fill a role at the company was 35 plus days. This ranges across the board from entry level roles such as business development representative, customer support representative, all the way up to VP level candidates. Because of the high time to fill, 35 plus days, it was slowing down business goals as well as obviously hiring goals. It was creating a backlog in the system in terms of recruiting and making it so that the teams at the company were not able to properly work and be staffed because of the uncertainty in the hiring process. And on top of that, because of the long turnaround time, numerous offers were not accepted due to slow processes and receiving other offers first. I think recruiters, we know this, oftentimes hiring managers don't, that if a candidate is talking to one company, they are likely talking to a second, third, etc. Right. And so you're not only trying to find the right fit, you're also trying to move them through the process quickly enough where that they're not found or scooped up by another company. Once again, don't hire the wrong person just to hire them, but at the same time, be mindful of time. And so what we did at a previous company was we trained all of our hiring managers on how to use the applicant tracking system. There was more to the training than just this, but I'm going to just touch on 5 quick things. So first off, we explained why an ATS was used or is used. It seems probably trivial or fairly simple to us professionals in talent acquisition / recruitment. But what we found was that a lot of our hiring managers did not know the point of an ATS. On top of that, we trained hiring managers on leading practices. And I want to thank Steve Levy for giving me the term leading practices. Best practices kind of signalizes an end or it's finalized. Leading practices, I like that better, but really training them on things like unconscious bias training. That should be a whole separate training on top of this, but just touching on that. We also created role specific templates. And so, as I mentioned, there was no usage of the ATS. We felt like it was a very daunting task to put hiring managers from zero usage to here's 10, 15 questions you have to fill in a scorecard. And so what we did was we went to every hiring manager that was going to have or potentially have an open role in the next 12 months. And we had them create 3 questions that they wanted to use and ask these candidates and put notes into the system. And so these questions range depending on the role and depending on the team, but ultimately it was 3 questions for every hiring manager. We didn't want to overload them with 12 to 15 questions. On top of that, we put 3 questions that were for internal use only at the end of those 3 questions. And they were, is this candidate a company culture fit? Can they grow their career at XYZ company? And lastly, and more importantly, was should this candidate be moved to the next steps of the process? And that last question ultimately was what signaled to me and the other recruiters that if it said yes there, we should move to the next step. It eliminated the need to wait for Slack feedback 2 to 3 days and made it so that the minute I saw that answer was yes, I could call that candidate and schedule for the next steps of the process. Once again, one of the ways that time to fill dropped 35 days down to 12 days. The last thing I want to touch on is the ATS and employment lawsuits. So, I most recruiters I think are aware of employment lawsuits, but hiring managers often aren't. And what we used here is it is very true that as a company continues to grow and more hiring happens, the more often or the more likely you are to open yourself up to potential employment lawsuits. Obviously, they are few and far between still, but at the same time, it does open you up to those. And if they were to ever happen, if you don't have notes in an applicant tracking system, it's much harder to prove that um, that what you're doing is not illegal, immoral, whatever term you want to use, right? That those notes can help you. And so by kind of scaring our hiring managers to a degree as well, um, we were able to get them to use that ATS. Now, to clarify, I don't want people to scare them that we're going to get sued, but at the same time, that possibility does increase and does go up as a company grows. And so after completing that training, some of the results we saw were, um, you know, from that 0% hiring manager usage of the ATS, it jumped to about 96% instantly or fairly instantly. We got buy-in from almost everyone of the hiring managers, with that exception of the CEO who we were working on. Feedback stopped being slacked and emailed to recruiters, once again, speeding up our time to fill. And we had a 96% offer acceptance rate. I mentioned earlier how um, candidates are talking to other companies, but by moving them through the process faster, you can see those acceptance rates go up, and ultimately the trust that hiring managers have in you as a talent partner continues to increase. So the last slide I want to touch on is really just kind of wrapping everything up and how a talent partner looks different versus an order taker. And so we touched on that average time to fill dropping from 35 plus days down to 12. We touched on the 96% offer acceptance rate, but beforehand it was undefined. They didn't track that data. We also touched, or I didn't touch on, but one of the things we tracked after this training was candidate experience. And so that increased 19.7%. So candidates were having a better experience. Once again, all this data leads us to understand, why we're getting high acceptance rates. And ultimately, when you are a talent partner, hiring managers listen rather than react. So that was the majority of what I wanted to go through. Once again, my LinkedIn is down there in the bottom left. Feel free to add me.